The dog with blood on his collar. If you had met me back then, you'd have found me smelling like wet fur and cheap shampoo, not gunpowder. I was just the quiet kid in the back of a tired little pet shop, trimming nails, sweeping hair, and counting coins to buy my mother's pills. It was raining that evening, the kind of slow, sticky rain that makes the whole city smell like rust and exhaust. The neon sign outside our window buzzed and flickered, half the letters dead, so from the street our place just read, Pet OM. My boss Tito was dozing behind the counter with the TV on some loud game show, and I was alone in the back room rinsing soap off a trembling cocker spaniel. Ordinary noise, ordinary fear, nothing that could kill you if you stayed small and polite. That was the rule I lived by: stay small, stay invisible. Then the engines stopped. You learn to recognize trouble by sound before you ever see it. The low idle of two black SUVs outside our glass door cut straight through the TV, through the rain, through my bones. The cocker spaniel started whimpering, nails scraping against the tub. I dried my hands on my apron and stepped out into the front room just as the first man walked in. He didn't look around like normal customers do. He moved like he already owned every square inch of the shop, the cracked tiles, the buzzing light, the breath in my chest. Dark suit, no tie, shirt open at the neck, and a tattoo sliding up from his collar like black smoke. Two more men followed, bulkier, their jackets too stiff in all the wrong places. You don't need to see the gun to know it's there. The air in the room got heavy, thick, like even the dust was afraid to move. Between them, straining on a chain, came the Pitbull. He was massive, all muscle and scars, his head too big for his body, chest like a loaded weapon. His collar was black leather studded with dull metal, and the thick silver chain cut into the folds of his neck when he pulled. Even through the rain and exhaust leaking in from the street, I could smell him already, iron, sweat, and something else that made my stomach twist. Old blood clung to the leather in dark, stiff patches. "Close the door," the man in front said. His voice was low, rough, like it had been dragged across gravel too many nights. Tito jumped up from his chair so fast the remote hit the floor. "Yes, sir, we're about to close," Tito stammered, eyes flicking from the dog to the man's hands. "Maybe tomorrow." The man turned his head just a little, and Tito shut up mid-sentence. Power doesn't need to shout. It just looks at you until you remember how easily you can disappear. "We don't come back tomorrow," one of the bigger guys said, chewing his gums slow. "The dog needs a bath, now." Tito's eyes found mine like I was some kind of lifeline, or maybe a shield. "Ayaan," he said, voice suddenly too bright, too friendly, "you're good with the difficult ones, right?" Every instinct in me screamed to step back, to disappear into the back room, to melt into the damp walls and stay there. Because I knew those SUVs. Everybody in our neighborhood knew that kind of car, that kind of man. We never said the word Mafia out loud, but it hung in the air anyway, like the smell of smoke after a fire. For a second my father's face flashed in my mind, the way my mother described him anyway. A driver who took the wrong street one night and didn't come home, a stray bullet, someone else's war. I had promised myself I would never get close to that kind of world, not with my mother's medicine sitting in a cracked plastic box at home and the rent already late. But the dog growled, low and constant, and I saw it then. Under all that muscle he was shaking, not from the cold, from something that looked very close to fear. "I'll do it," I heard myself say. My voice didn't sound like mine. It sounded older, thinner, like it had already accepted the worst. The man in front finally looked at me, really looked. His eyes were a strange color in the flickering light, almost amber but tired, ringed with nights that had never ended. There was something ancient in them, something dangerous, and for a split second something exhausted. "You sure, Chico?" one of the bodyguards snorted. "This one's not a pet, he's a weapon." The dog snapped at the air, teeth clicking shut with a sound that made my skin crawl. The chain rattled hard enough to scrape the tiles. Tito made a little choking noise behind the counter. My hands were sweating, but I held the dog's gaze. It's a stupid thing I do, maybe, but animals always taught me more truth than people. Behind the rage in his eyes I saw something else. Confusion, pain, a wild animal that had been taught to be a monster. "I'm sure," I said, though my knees were shaking. "He just needs someone to touch him like he's not a gun." For a second the room went quiet. The rain, the TV, the traffic outside, it all slipped away. The man in front tilted his head, studying me like I was a puzzle he hadn't expected to find in this broken little shop. Then he nodded once to his men. "Take off the chain," he said. The bigger guy hesitated. "Boss, without the chain." I said, the man repeated, softer this time, "Take it off." That's when I understood who he was, or at least what he was. In our neighborhood nobody argued with a man like that. Not the police, not the mayor, and definitely not the guy chewing gum in my doorway. The bodyguard unhooked the chain with stiff fingers. The collar stayed bulky and tight, but now there was nothing anchoring the dog. If he lunged, there would be nothing between his teeth and my throat. I led him slowly towards the back room. Each step felt like it might be my last. His nails clicked against the tiles, breath hot against my wrist. The moment the door swung shut behind us, the thin walls swallowed the murmur of male voices, and it was just me and him and the sound of the dripping faucet. The back room suddenly felt too small. Fluorescent light hummed overhead, making everything look harsher, sharper. The rust around the drain, the cracks in the tiles, the faded posters of cartoon dogs pretending the world was kinder than it is. "Easy," I whispered, more to my own heartbeat than to him. "We're just getting clean, okay? No one's gonna hurt you in here." He answered with a growl that started deep in his chest and rolled up through his body. Lips curled back, gums dark, teeth bright white. I moved slow, showing him my hands the way you do with someone who's already expecting a blow. I reached for the plastic muzzle hanging from the hook, then stopped. His eyes narrowed, muscles tightening. He'd worn these things before. He knew what they meant: control, force, no choice. I put the muzzle back. "Okay," I breathed. "We do it my way." I turned on the warm water first, letting it run, letting the sound fill the room. Then I dipped my hand in and flicked a few drops gently onto his front paw. His whole body flinched, but he didn't snap. Another paw, then his shoulder. My fingers brushed against old scars, thin lines raised and rough, like someone had written a language of violence on his skin. "Someone did you wrong, huh?" I murmured. "You didn't ask to be like this." Slowly, I coaxed him into the metal tub. His legs shook so hard I thought he'd jump out, but he stayed, chest heaving. I started with his back, careful, steady circles of shampoo. The foam turned a faint grey-brown as dirt, and whatever life he'd been living melted into the water. His breathing stayed fast, but his growling faded to a low, wounded sound, like he was remembering something softer and didn't know if he should. Halfway through, he snapped. My hand slipped near his ear and his head whipped around, teeth clamping just shy of my skin. I felt the rush of air as his jaws closed, a ghost bite that would have taken my fingers if he'd committed. My heart slammed against my ribs. I didn't yank back. I didn't shout. I forced myself to stay still, eyes on his. "It's okay," I whispered, voice shaking but soft. "You can be scared, just don't be alone in it." For a moment I thought that was it, that he'd lunge, that my blood would join the stains on his collar, that Tito would be mopping up what was left of me off these cracked tiles. But something in him shifted. The tension in his jaw loosened just a little. His eyes, still fierce, blinked once, then again. He let go of my sleeve. I exhaled slowly, the breath coming out of me like I'd been holding it my whole life. I went back to the shampoo, gentler now, talking nonsense to him just to fill the air with something that wasn't fear. Stories about my mother's chicken soup, about the stray cat that bullied our whole street, about how I used to sleep with my face buried in our old dog's fur just to forget how hungry I was. By the time I rinsed him, the growling had stopped. He was still tense, but one of his massive paws had slid forward, pressing against my leg like he was anchoring himself to the only soft thing in the room. When I cut the water, the silence that followed felt different, less like a threat, more like a held breath. The door clicked open behind me. I didn't have to turn to know it was him. You feel certain people before you see them, like a change in temperature. His cologne was clean and sharp, cutting through the smell of wet dog and cheap soap. His shoes were black, real leather, not the cracked imitation pairs we bought in the market. They stopped just behind me. "How is he?" the man asked. Up close, his voice felt heavier, like it carried the weight of things he'd never say out loud. I glanced over my shoulder. He was standing there, hands in his pockets, expression unreadable. But his eyes, those tired amber eyes, were fixed not on me but on the dog. And in that moment I saw it, a flash of something like worry. "He's trying," I said, "scared, but he wants to be good." A corner of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "Wanting doesn't change what he's done." I swallowed. "Maybe, but it changes what he does next." He stepped closer, shoulder almost brushing mine, close enough that I could see the faint white line of an old scar cutting through his eyebrow. His presence should have made me back away, but somehow it steadied my hands. The dog watched him with wide, alert eyes but didn't bare his teeth. "What's his name?" I asked. The man's gaze didn't leave the dog. "They call him Diablo." Of course they did, the devil. A weapon, a monster, a story you tell at night so people remember to be afraid. I looked at the dog, at the way his head had lowered, resting now almost gently against my knee. He doesn't look like a Diablo to me, I said quietly. He looks like he's tired. The man finally looked at me, and for a second it felt like he could see right through my skin, down to the old and private fears I kept folded inside my ribs. "What's your name?" he asked. "Ayaan." He repeated it under his breath, tasting it like he was deciding where it fit in his world. Then his gaze dropped to my hands, still moving slow over the dog's back. The veins stood out under my skin, tendons tight from holding in the shaking. "You're afraid," he said, not a question. Yes, I admitted, there was no point lying to a man like this, but he's more afraid than me. Someone has to be the brave one, at least for a few minutes. The silence that followed felt strange, heavy but not hostile. He stared at me, then at the dog, who had finally closed his eyes, breathing deep and even, like he hadn't slept properly in years. In that tiny back room, with water still dripping from the faucet and cheap shampoo bubbles clinging to my forearms, something shifted. The distance between our worlds grew thinner, like a door standing half open. I didn't understand it yet, but I felt it. The man reached out and very gently placed his hand on the dog's wet head. The dog didn't flinch. He just sighed, a long, shuddering sound that broke something small and hard inside my chest. "I've had him for 3 years," the man said quietly, almost to himself. "No one touches him like that." I didn't know what to answer, so I said nothing. My fingers kept moving on instinct, scratches behind the ear, slow strokes down the spine, the way you remind a frightened creature that the world isn't entirely cruel. He took his hand back and straightened up. When he spoke again, his voice had changed, still dangerous, still carrying that unspoken threat of violence, but wrapped now in something colder: decision. "Dry him," he said, "careful with the scars." I nodded, reaching for the towel. The dog leaned more of his weight against me as I worked, trusting me in that naive, heartbreaking way only animals and children do. I could feel the man's gaze on us, sharp and calculating, like he was putting pieces together in his head. When I finished, I stepped back. The dog sat in the tub, damp and cleaner, eyes half closed, head a little lower. Not a devil, just tired, just used. I felt the man move closer again before I saw him. He was so near now that his shadow fell over both me and the dog. My throat went dry. "Ayaan," he said, and my name in his mouth sounded different, like a choice, like a claim, from now on. He paused, and I realized I was holding my breath. The rain beat against the window, the faucet dripped, the dog's chest rose and fell against my leg. "From now on," he finished, his voice low enough that it settled in my bones, "you're mine." "The night the lion took me." The word "mine" hung in the steam-thick air like a blade. For a second I thought he meant it the way men like him mean everything: total, permanent, no exit, property. My throat closed. What does that mean?" I managed, fingers still buried in Diablo's damp fur. The man's eyes stayed on me, steady, unreadable. Up close, those amber irises were even stranger, flecks of gold interrupted by tiny dark cracks, like something beautiful that had been stepped on too many times. "It means," he said slowly, "you don't work for that sleepy coward out front anymore." He jerked his chin toward the shop, where Tito was probably praying in front of the TV. "You work for me, you take care of the dog. He stays alive, he stays calm, you answer when I call, simple. Simple, like changing oxygen." I have a mother," I blurted out, because that was the only card I had. "She's sick, I can't just disappear." His gaze moved over my face, taking in every panic line, every twitch. "You think I said you're mine and didn't already know what you owe the pharmacy on Caltrice?" he said quietly. The back of my neck went cold. The way he said the street name, the exact number, like he'd been walking through my life while I slept. "You send money home, Chico," he went on. "More than that rat Tito ever paid you. Your mother keeps her pills, you keep your hands, everyone wins." And if I say no, the question crawled out of me before I could stop it. He studied me for a beat that felt like a fall. Then, instead of getting angry, he did something worse. He smiled, just a little. "Then someone else will own you," he said. "Maybe the cops, maybe the men who hate me, maybe the streets out there you'll meet. With me at least you're something." His hand landed once more on Diablo's head. The dog leaned into it, still watching me, as if even he was waiting for my answer. Fear has flavors. Until that night I only knew the cheap ones: empty stomach fear, landlord fear, bill fear. This was different. This was high-quality fear, sharp and heavy, like holding a diamond you never asked for and knowing you can't afford to drop it. I swallowed. What exactly am I with you? His eyes softened by a fraction. Protected, he said, then after a beat like a warning, and responsible. He turned and walked out before I could argue with either of those words. By the time I led Diablo back into the front of the shop, my legs felt like someone else. Tito was standing behind the counter, wringing a rag between his hands like he wanted to disappear into it. The man, my new owner, I guess, was leaning against the glass counter with the lazy posture of someone who'd decided, a long time ago, that no room could ever threaten him. One of his guys had turned off the TV. The silence felt thick. "How much does he owe you?" the man asked Tito without looking at him. "Oh, who?" Tito blinked. "The boy, for his last month, his last week, the air he's been breathing in here. How much?" Tito's eyes darted to me, then to the floor. "No, sir, it's nothing." "Don't insult me," the man cut in, voice soft but sharp. "Everyone owes someone." Tito's shoulders slumped. He named a number that made my cheeks burn. It was more than I made in 2 months. The man didn't argue. He snapped his fingers, and one of his bodyguards pulled out a thick envelope, placed it on the counter with a soft slap. "For the debt," the man said, "and for your silence, he doesn't come back here unless I send him." Tito stared at the envelope like it might explode. "Sir, the boy's a good kid. He doesn't know." "He knows enough," the man said. Then finally his gaze flicked back to me. "He chose to stay in the room with a killer dog. That tells me what I need to know." I wanted to say it hadn't felt like a choice. I wanted to say I had only stayed because some part of me couldn't leave anything shaking and alone in a metal tub. But the words died in my throat. Men like him didn't care about the reasons that made you human, only the results that made you useful. "Get your things," he told me. "You're coming with me tonight." Tonight, my voice cracked. "But my mother." "You'll see her tomorrow," he said. "I'll send a car. You tell her whatever makes her sleep. New job, good money. Do not tell her my name." He pushed off the counter and walked toward the door. The 2 big guys followed. Diablo's chain clinked as he moved to go after him, then hesitated and looked back at me. I looked at Tito. He was already shoving the envelope into the cash drawer with shaking hands. His eyes were wet, red at the edges. He came around the counter and grabbed my shoulders in those same hands that used to smack the back of my head when I broke a bottle. "Listen to me, Hijo," he whispered so low I almost didn't hear it. "You think I sold you, but there are worse ways this city can take you. He's a lion. Lions protect their own. Stay small, stay useful, don't grow teeth, you understand?" I didn't, not really, but I nodded anyway. It's one of my worst habits, agreeing to things I don't yet understand. Tito pulled me into a quick, awkward hug that smelled like tobacco and dog food. When he pulled back, his eyes avoided mine, as if he couldn't bear to see what he'd just done. I stepped out into the wet night with my apron still on and my heart somewhere behind my ribs, trying to claw its way out. The SUVs waited at the curb like black sharks, matte paint beading with rain. One of the big guys opened the back door. Inside, the leather looked softer than anything I'd ever sat on. "Get in," he said. Diablo jumped up first, landing with heavy grace, then turned and watched me like he was making sure I followed. I climbed in, my damp sneakers squeaking against the step, and slid onto the seat beside him. His body was warm, almost too warm, a constant live weight against my thigh. The man sat across from us in the seat that faced backwards. Up close in this cramped space, the details sharpened, the thin gold chain around his neck, the heavy watch, the faint scar along his jaw that disappeared into his collar. He loosened his cuffs with a small, precise movement as the door shut and sealed us away from the street. The car pulled off, the city sliding past in streaks of neon and rain through the tinted windows. For a while no one spoke. Diablo's breathing was steady now, my own was not. "What do people call you?" I asked finally, because the silence was worse than danger. The man's gaze lifted from his cufflinks to my face, like he was surprised I'd asked. One of the bodyguards in the front seat shifted, as if ready to snap at me on his boss's behalf, but the man raised one hand, silencing him. "In the street," he said, "they call me El Leon." The lion, of course. It fit him in a way that made my skin prickle. "And you," I pressed, my courage a thin, shaking thread. "What do I call you?" He considered that. The city lights cut across his face in flashes, blue, red, green, like different men, different moods. Senor Vargas, he said at last, when others are around, when it's just us, Leon is fine. I didn't miss the weight on that last word, us, as if, by stepping into this car, I'd already crossed some invisible line. So Ayaan, he said, leaning back, tell me, why didn't you run? There it was, the question I'd been asking myself since the back room. I looked down at my hands, at the faint red marks from Diablo's almost bite, at the cheap plastic watch my mother had given me on my last birthday. Run where, run how, from men who own streets, cops, judges. He was shaking, I said finally. The dog, you all looked like you were used to fear, he didn't. For a moment, pure silence, even the wipers seemed to hold their breath. Then something almost like amusement touched the corners of his mouth. You put your life between my dog's teeth and my money because he was shaking. When something's that afraid, it usually means someone hurt it, I said, the words coming faster now, exposing a part of me I usually hid. Hurt it bad, I know what that looks like, so yeah, I didn't run. He watched me like a puzzle, or a weapon he hadn't decided how to use yet. You talk too much truth for this city, he murmured. We'll have to fix that. I didn't know if that meant teach me to lie, or make sure I never talked to anyone but him. The car turned off the main road onto a quieter, cleaner street. The buildings changed, less graffiti, more glass. Balconies with plants instead of rusted metal and laundry lines. People like us didn't come to this part of town unless they were delivering something or cleaning. At the end of the block, a high wall rose up, crowned with neat, mean-looking spikes. A solid metal gate slid open as we approached, light spilling out onto the wet pavement. Inside, it was another world. A long driveway lined with trimmed hedges and stone lions, of course, curved toward a big house that looked like it had been dragged out of a movie. White columns, wide steps, too many windows. Warm light glowed behind thick glass. But my eyes went to the shadows. The men standing just outside the pools of light, hands near their belts, the glint of gun barrels, cameras tucked into corners, small red dots blinking watchfully. The SUV rolled to a stop under a covered entrance. One of the big guys opened the door. Diablo hopped out first again, landing on the polished stone with a soft thud. I followed, blinking at the sheer size of the house. Welcome to the cage, Leon said quietly beside me. It looks nicer from the inside. He led the way up the steps. The door opened before he reached it, a man in a crisp shirt bowing slightly, eyes never quite meeting his. Inside, everything felt too clean. Marble floors that echoed every step, art on the walls that probably cost more than our entire building. A chandelier hung overhead, rainbows trapped in its glass. Somewhere deeper in the house, a woman laughed, high and nervous, then hushed at the sound of our arrival. Leon didn't pause to enjoy any of it. He walked through it like he walked through my cheap little shop, as if none of it impressed him, because it all belonged to him anyway. You'll stay here, he said, turning down a side hallway that smelled faintly of disinfectant and dog. He opened a door near the end. The room was small but clean. A narrow bed, a metal locker, a tiny desk, a single barred window. Against the opposite wall I saw it, a large crate with a thick blanket, a water bowl, and tossed to one side a chewed-up rope toy. Diablo trotted straight into the room like he knew it well and flopped down beside the crate, sighing. His eyes, though, tracked me, like he needed to make sure I didn't vanish. You sleep there, Leon said, nodding at the bed. He sleeps where he wants. There's a shower at the end of the hall. You eat when I say, you leave when I say, any problem. 100 problems crowded my throat. I swallowed them all down. No, I said, no problem. He watched me a moment longer, then turned to go. At the door, he paused. Ayaan, he said without looking back, this house has rules. First one, you see only what I let you see. You hear only what I want you to hear. That's how you stay alive in my world, Entians. I understand, I lied. He nodded once and left, closing the door behind him with a quiet click that felt louder than a slam. For a while I just stood there listening, footsteps fading, a distant door opening, more voices low and tense. Somewhere in the house a glass shattered, followed by a sharp curse, then silence again, heavy and watchful. Diablo shifted, breathing out a soft huff. I sank down on the floor beside him, my back against the cool wall. My head spun. A few hours ago I'd been trimming nails and dodging Tito's half-hearted scolding. Now I was inside the lion's den, a guest and a prisoner at the same time. I must have dozed off eventually, my body too tired to hold so much fear awake. I woke to the sound of screaming. It wasn't loud, that made it worse. A muffled, choked sound like someone trying to swallow their own pain. It came from somewhere below, vibrating up through the floor into my bones. Diablo was already on his feet, ears pricked, body stiff. He glanced at me, then at the door. My heart pounded. I told myself to stay, to follow the rule, to pretend I was deaf. But curiosity is its own kind of hunger, and that sound, that almost scream, latched onto something in me that had always wanted to know where the missing pieces of my life had gone. I stood up quietly and opened the door a crack. The hallway was dim, lit only by a nightlight near the stairs. Shadows lay thick in the corners. The house felt different at night, less like a palace, more like a throat closing around a secret. Diablo slipped out before I could grab his collar. His nails clicked softly on the polished floor as he padded toward the stairs, then paused to look back at me. "Come back," I whispered. He didn't. He just stared until I sighed and followed. We moved like ghosts down one flight, then another, into a part of the house that smelled of cold stone and bleach. The almost screaming stopped. A low murmur of voices took its place. At the bottom of the last flight, a heavy door stood slightly ajar. A hard white light spilled out through the crack, cutting across the dark hallway. The smell hit me first, metallic and sharp, poorly hidden under chemical cleaner. My stomach turned. I should have run back to my little bed. I should have pretended I slept through all of it. But Diablo pushed his nose against the door, just enough to widen the gap. His body blocked me from view as I peered over his shoulder. Inside, the room was all tile and stainless steel, a drain in the center of the floor, a metal table pushed against one wall, streaked with something pinkish that the cleaning cloth hadn't fully erased. Two men were dragging a heavy shape wrapped in a stained sheet toward the far corner. Another was scrubbing the floor on his knees, jaw tight. Standing in the middle of it all, shirt sleeves rolled up, was Ayaan. His white shirt wasn't white anymore. Dark splashes stained the cuffs, small dots speckled the front. His hands were bare, veins raised, knuckles reddened. He was staring at the drain, at the thin swirl of diluted red slipping away, as if it was whispering something only he could hear. I didn't see his face at first. I saw his hands, the same hands that had rested, gentle, on Diablo's head, the same hands that had reached into his pocket for money like it was nothing. Now they were marked with the proof of what it cost to be a lion. Then, as if he'd felt my eyes on him, he lifted his head. His gaze landed on Diablo first, then shifted slowly to me, half hidden behind the dog in the doorway. For a heartbeat, everything stopped, the men dragging the sheet, the one scrubbing the floor, even the drip from the hose. The only sound was the pounding in my ears. Our eyes met across the tiled room, the boy who bathed his monster and the lion with blood on his cuffs. And in that frozen second, with the smell of bleach and iron burning my nose, I finally understood that "you're mine" hadn't been a kindness. It had been a sentence. His jaw tightened. "Close the door, Ayaan," he said, voice like ground glass. And I knew, as my hand found the knob, that whatever came next, there was no clean way back to the life I'd had. Not anymore. Washing off the blood. His shirt cuffs were still wet when he stepped toward me. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my body froze. Diablo stayed rooted in the doorway, muscles tense, blocking half of Leon's path, as if he wasn't quite sure which side he belonged on anymore. "Ayaan," Leon repeated, calmer now, but that calm was worse. It was the sound of a decision already made. "Close the door." My fingers finally listened. I pulled the door half shut, but not all the way. Some small, suicidal part of me needed to hear what happened next, even if I couldn't see it. A guard moved toward us, anger carved all over his face. "He shouldn't be down here, boss. You want I." "You will do nothing," Leon cut in. His eyes never left mine. "He followed the dog. That's my mistake, not his." The guard stepped back immediately. The power in that room wasn't in the guns or the blood. It was in those small pauses, those quiet corrections that everyone obeyed like gravity. "Come here," Leon said to me. My legs carried me forward in short, unsteady steps. Diablo pressed so close against my side I could feel his heartbeat through my jeans. When we were just inside the door, Leon reached out and very gently swung it shut behind us. The click of the latch echoed in my bones. Up close, the stains on his shirt looked darker, almost black. They weren't all from one person, that much I could tell. Some spatters were old, faded at the edges. Some were fresh, still glistening in the harsh light, a history of decisions written in someone else's red. His hand landed on my shoulder, warm, heavy. "You remember my first rule?" he asked quietly. My throat was too tight to answer, but I nodded. "You saw something you weren't meant to see," he said, "so now I have two choices. One, I put you in that sheet, send you wherever that poor bastard is going. Two, I trust that you keep your eyes selective." He let that hang between us. Somewhere behind him, the guards shifted, the wet sound of fabric on tile whispered. Diablo gave a low whine. "Look at me," Leon said. I forced my eyes up from the stains to his face. He looked tired, not the regular tired of long days and little sleep, the kind of tired that lives in your soul when you've had to do too many things you can't ever undo. "I didn't bring you here to make you one of them," he said, tipping his head toward the men in the room. "I brought you here because, for some reason I still don't understand, my dog chose you. You're here for him, nothing else, you get that?" I don't want to be part of this," I whispered, my voice trembling. "Whatever this is." A muscle jumped in his jaw. "You live in my city, Chico. You've always been part of this. You just pretended you were." He wasn't wrong. My father's empty chair at our table, the gunshots that sometimes echoed down our street at night, the way my mother triple-locked the door and never stood near the windows, those were all pieces of this same puzzle. I just refused to look at the picture. "What did he do?" I asked, nodding toward the shape under the sheet, keeping my voice just above a whisper. "The man." Leon's eyes cooled. He forgot who protected his family. He thought the enemies at his door were kinder than the devil he knew. He was wrong. The answer sat in my stomach like a stone. He squeezed my shoulder once, not reassuring but firm. "I'm not the hero in your story, Ayaan. Don't make that mistake. But if you stay close, do your job, keep your mouth shut, I can make sure your mother never hears bullets the way that man's family just did." He stepped back, nodding toward the staircase. "Take the dog, go upstairs, sleep, you see nothing, you heard cleaning, that's all." For a second I hesitated. "And if I can't pretend?" I asked, the question slipping out before I could stop it. His eyes flashed just for a moment with something like respect, or maybe annoyance at my stupidity. "Then I made a mistake bringing you here," he said, "and I don't allow my mistakes to walk around breathing." There it was, no poetry, no metaphor, just the hard edge under the silk. "Go," he finished, turning away before I could answer. I walked out of that room with Diablo glued to my leg, the sound of water running and brushes scrubbing chasing me up the stairs. Each step felt like I was climbing out of my old life and into something colder, sharper. Back in my little room, I sank onto the bed and buried my face in my hands. My palms still smelled like wet dog and cheap shampoo. Under it, faint but present, I could smell the metal tang from downstairs. For the first time that night, I let myself hope I'd made the wrong choice. That in the morning I'd wake up, and this would all turn back into my ordinary, empty fear. It didn't. Morning came bright and unforgiving, sunlight pushing through the bars of my window and striping the floor. My head throbbed, my eyes burned, even though I couldn't remember actually crying. Diablo lay at the foot of my bed, chin on his paws, watching me. When I sat up, he thumped his tail twice, cautiously, as if asking permission to be happy. Yeah, I muttered, swinging my legs over the side. "You dragged me into hell, you don't get to be cute now." He licked my wrist anyway, warm tongue dragging over the faint marks his teeth had left yesterday. Apology, maybe, or just habit. A knock sounded at the door, sharp twice. I opened it to find a thin man in a grey shirt, holding a folded pile of clothes. "Senor Vargas says you dress properly," he said, eyes flicking briefly over my pet shop apron and worn jeans before dropping back to the middle distance. "Breakfast in 10 minutes, downstairs, follow the dog." He handed me the clothes and walked away without waiting for an answer. The shirt was plain white, the pants black. The fabric felt thick, smooth, too expensive for someone like me. I showered quickly, letting the hot water pound against my skull, washing away some of the night. I half expected red to swirl down the drain. Only clear water did. When I stepped out into the hallway, Diablo was waiting. He seemed to know the path, trotting ahead and glancing back to make sure I kept up. We passed other doors, other lives tucked behind them, voices murmuring, a radio playing softly, the clatter of dishes. This house wasn't just a cage, it was a hive. The dining room was big but not as ridiculous as I'd imagined. A long table, simple but massive, sat in the center. Sunlight spilled in through tall windows, catching dust motes in the air. On one side of the table sat three men I didn't know, all in suits, murmuring over coffee. On the other, alone, was Leon. He looked different in the morning. No blood, dark blue shirt, cuffs buttoned, hair still damp from a shower, the lion costume back in place. His eyes lifted as I entered. They flicked over the clean clothes. The way I hovered near the door, Diablo pressed against my leg. One of his eyebrows rose just a little. "Come," he said, nodding to the chair on his right. "Eat." I sat stiffly, conscious of the men across from us, their voices dropping when I pulled my chair out. A woman in an apron appeared with a plate and set it in front of me. Eggs, bread, avocado, more food than I usually saw before noon. My stomach growled, betraying me. "Go on," Leon said, tearing a piece of bread with long fingers. "If you faint on the dog, he'll get offended." I took a bite. The food tasted wrong almost. Not because it was bad, it was probably the best breakfast I'd ever had, but because I kept thinking of who had paid for it, of the shape under the sheet. "Thank you," I forced out. One of the suited men snorted softly. "Picking up street kids now, Hefe," he muttered. "You getting soft in your old age." The room cooled by a few degrees. Leon didn't look at the man. He spread butter on his bread with slow care. "You like having a face?" he asked mildly. The man blinked. What? "A face," Leon repeated, still not looking up. "You enjoy how yours is arranged. Eyes where they belong, teeth that work, nose straight." The man swallowed. "Yes, Hefe." "Then don't call my decisions soft again." Leon finally looked up and the air pressed tighter around us. "Soft is what your body becomes when I'm done with it. Clear." "She, Hefe." The man's voice had dropped 2 octaves. The moment passed as quickly as it came. Leon took a sip of coffee, then turned his attention back to me. "Today you meet the vet," he said. "We keep one on call, good man, quiet. He'll show you where the medical supplies are, how to handle Diablo if he gets triggered." Triggered, nice word for turns into a weapon. "Triggered by what?" I asked. Leon's jaw clenched. For a second, the tired version of him from last night peeked through. "Men's voices," he said, "shouting, guns, dark rooms." He paused, sometimes his own reflection. I pictured Diablo snapping at a mirror, convinced the other dog was coming to hurt him. My chest tightened. "Where did you get him?" I asked before I could stop myself. "Diablo." Leon's eyes dropped to the dog, who was now lying at my feet, head resting on my shoe like it belonged there. "From a circle of hell," he said quietly. "They call it a ring, dog fights, men betting on pain. He was going to die there. I paid more than he was worth and took him out." A flash of pride maybe in his voice, or just satisfaction. "You saved him," I said. "Don't dress it up," he countered. "I saved him and turned him into something else that kills for me. There's a difference between kindness and usefulness. Don't confuse them." But as he spoke, his hand slid down under the table and brushed the top of Diablo's head once, a small, unconscious tenderness that betrayed him. After breakfast, the day blurred into new routines. The vet, a quiet man with tired eyes, showed me the small clinic room behind the kennels, stocked with more medicine than our entire neighborhood pharmacy. He taught me how to check Diablo's paws for cuts, how to clean his ears, how to wrap his ribs if he ever cracked one in a fight. "He trusts you," the vet said at one point, watching as Diablo rolled onto his back and let me touch his belly without so much as a growl. "He barely lets me get near his mouth." "He doesn't trust me," I said. "He just recognizes something." The vet nodded slowly, like he understood more than he said. By afternoon, I'd learned the rhythm of the house a little. Men came and went through a side entrance, always in pairs. Trucks pulled into the back, unloaded boxes, left quickly. Nobody ever raised their voice. Orders were given quietly with that same heavy, unquestioned certainty. Once I stepped out into the courtyard for air and saw something that didn't fit. Near the gate, a little boy kicked a deflated soccer ball against the wall, his clothes too big, his shoes too small. An old woman sat on a plastic chair nearby, a shawl pulled tight around her shoulders. One of the guards stood a little apart, keeping watch on the street. The boy kicked too hard. The ball bounced off the wall and rolled toward the open driveway. A car was coming in. The boy didn't see. Before I could even shout, Leon stepped out from behind one of the columns. In 2 strides, he was at the kid's side, one hand snagging the back of his shirt, yanking him out of the car's path. The vehicle screeched to a halt anyway, driver white-faced. Use your eyes, idiota, Leon snapped, not at the boy but at the driver. Lo siento, jefe, the man stammered. Leon turned to the boy, dropped to a half-crouch so their faces were level. You see cars, you wait, he said, voice firm but not unkind. Inside here you're safe, but only if you're not stupid, understood? The boy nodded, wide-eyed. Leon flicked his forehead lightly, more like a tap than a hit, then picked up the sad little ball and handed it back. The old woman murmured, Gracias, hijo, her voice shaking with relief. He squeezed her shoulder once and walked away, as if he hadn't just almost gotten a child killed or saved his life, depending on how you looked at it. That was the thing about him. Every act was a coin, one side sharp, one side smooth. You never knew which one would land facing you. Late that afternoon, the house shifted. The air got tighter, guards moved faster, radios crackled more than usual. Diablo, who'd been napping, shot to his feet and paced, nose in the air. Then the call came. A few clipped words on a radio, a sharp order, the slam of a door, Leon's voice louder than I'd heard it all day, bring the dog. My chest went hollow. I snapped the leash onto Diablo's collar, even though a part of me knew that leash was just decoration. He pulled me down the stairs toward the back entrance, where two SUVs idled, engines humming. Leon stood by the open back door of one of them, talking to three men with hard eyes. When he saw me, he nodded at Diablo. Only if I tell you, he said. You keep him on the leash until then, you stay in the car, you don't look where I don't point, you understand? What's happening? I asked, my hand unconsciously tightening on the leather. Someone thinks they can move in on my streets, he said. Tonight we remind them they can't. His voice was flat, like he was talking about moving furniture, not human lives. The drive was shorter this time. Industrial buildings, graffiti, the skeletons of half-finished constructions. We stopped in a wide, empty lot behind a warehouse I'd passed 100 times on my way home from the shop. Stay, Leon ordered me before stepping out. I sat there, Diablo pressed against my legs, listening. Footsteps on gravel, car doors closing, a few words too low to catch, then shouts, a scuffle, a gunshot that made Diablo jerk under my hands, a growl ripping up his throat. Then Leon's voice sharp, Ahura. Everything exploded. The back door flew open. Out, one of the guards barked. Diablo didn't wait for me. He launched himself out of the car, hitting the ground running, following Leon's pointing arm like a missile. I stumbled after him, dragged by the leash I could no longer control. In the harsh light of a single street lamp, the scene snapped into focus. Three men, faces I didn't know, backs against a wall. Two of them had guns half raised, panic making their hands shake. Our men had them half surrounded. One of the strangers fired wildly. The shot went nowhere, ricocheting off concrete. The sound cracked the air. Diablo, Leon roared. The dog was already moving. He hit the gunman like a truck, jaws finding the man's forearm, teeth sinking in deep. The scream that followed sliced through me. Diablo shook his head once hard, ripping the gun from the man's grip. It skittered across the ground. Another of our guys kicked it away. Everything blurred after that. Shouts, the thud of fists, a crunch I didn't want to name. One of the men hit the ground and didn't move again. Someone else begged in a language of sorry that I didn't believe. Enough, Leon shouted. That one lives, he talks first. He turned to me, call your dog. My mouth was dry. Diablo, Ven. The command came out shakier than I wanted. The Pitbull's head snapped toward my voice. For a second the killing fog was still in his eyes, then something shifted. He released the mangled arm, backing away, lips still curled but no longer closing around flesh. He came to me intense, stalking steps, sides heaving. Blood dripped from his mouth, thick and dark, spattering the gravel. It wasn't his. My hands shook as I grabbed his collar, pulling him close. The coppery smell slammed into me. He whined once, high and confused, as if only now realizing what he'd done. You did good, one of the men muttered, clapping his bloody shoulder. Diablo flinched. Back in the car, Leon told me. Straight home, straight to the shower, you clean him, all of it, you don't leave a dot. I bit back a protest. This was the job. This was why I was here, not just to calm the dog when he was scared, but to wash the sins off him when he'd done what they wanted. The drive back was silent. I kept my hand on Diablo's neck, feeling the tension vibrating through him. Every time I blinked, I saw that man's arm between his teeth. In the back room of the house, it was just like the first night and nothing like it. Warm water, shampoo, my hands moving in circles over trembling muscle. Only this time the foam turned pink, then red. It swirled down the drain in thin, accusing lines. Diablo's eyes were wide, almost panicked, as if he didn't understand where all this color was coming from. He snapped at the water once, then looked at me, as if asking if he'd done something unforgivable. "You didn't choose this," I whispered, more to myself than to him. "They put this in your teeth." Somewhere behind me, the door opened. "You get used to it," Leon said quietly. I didn't turn around, "Do you?" Silence stretched heavy. Then I felt him step closer, his reflection appearing in the metal of the faucet. "No," he said, "you just learn to live with not getting used to it." I kept scrubbing, my eyes strung, but I refused to let tears fall while his men might be watching. "You use him like a gun," I said, my voice low. "But he's not a gun, he feels it. Whatever you send him to do, he feels it." "I know," Leon said. Something in his tone made me glance back. He was leaning against the doorframe, sleeves rolled up, a dark stain on one cuff that he hadn't noticed. His face was harder than I'd seen it all day, but his eyes stayed on Diablo, not the blood washing off him. "He was never supposed to be this," he murmured. "I took him because I was tired of watching men cheer when animals tore each other apart. I thought I was saving him." He huffed a humorless laugh. "Then someone put a gun to my brother's head, and suddenly I needed something that bit back." The word brother landed with a dull thud. "He's all I have left from that life," Leon said, voice roughening for the first time. "So I make sure he's fed, I make sure he sleeps somewhere warm, I make sure when he has to be a monster he isn't one alone. That's where you come in." I swallowed. "You want me to make him forget what you make him do?" "No," he pushed off the frame, stepping into the room. "I want you to remind him there's more to him than what I make him do. That somewhere under all that training and fear and blood, he's still a dog. You can do that, can't you?" His eyes met mine, not as a boss, but almost as a man asking for something he wasn't used to asking anyone: help. "I can try," I said. For a moment we just stood there, the lion, the weapon, and the kid trying to wash hell off its fur. When the last trace of red had swirled away, I turned off the water. Diablo sagged against my leg, exhausted. I wrapped him in a towel, rubbing him dry in slow, grounding strokes. "You did good," I whispered into his damp fur, the words catching on the edge of my tongue. "You came back when I called, that's something." He licked my wrist once, then closed his eyes. Later that night, the house finally quiet, I wandered out of my room too wired to sleep. The hallway lights were dimmed, most doors were closed. Somewhere faint music played, tinny and sad. I meant to go to the kitchen, maybe get water, maybe just reassure myself the world outside my little room still existed. Instead, I got lost. Two wrong turns and I ended up in a part of the house I hadn't seen before. Thicker carpet, darker wood, the air heavier with cologne and old secrets. At the end of the corridor, a door stood slightly ajar, warm light spilling out. I should have turned around. But curiosity again tugged at me. I stepped closer, careful to keep my feet silent. Inside, the room was lined with shelves and leather-bound books. A big desk sat near the window, papers spread out in neat stacks. On the far wall in mismatched frames were photographs, dozens of them, men in suits, men in work clothes, cars, parties, weddings. People. My eyes skimmed the wall and then stopped. There, in the center of one cluster, was a picture that punched the air out of my lungs. A man in his 30s, maybe, dark hair, thick mustache, crooked smile, standing beside a black SUV, one arm draped casually over the open door. On the other side of the door stood a younger Leon, no lines around his eyes yet, cigarette tucked behind his ear. Between them, sitting proudly like he owned the world, was a Pitbull puppy with a too big head and uncertain eyes. I didn't see Leon in that photo, I didn't see the puppy. I saw my father. Not from memory, I barely had any of those. From an old, faded picture my mother kept in her Bible, the corners soft from years of being touched, the same smile, the same eyes, the same tilt of the head like he was listening to a joke only he could hear. My knees almost gave out. "Nice shot, isn't it?" a voice said behind me. I spun around. Leon stood in the doorway, shadows cutting his face in half. He wasn't angry, that scared me more. "You look like him when you're angry," he said softly. "Your father." and the floor of my world dropped away. If this story touched you, don't leave it here. Like, comment, and subscribe, and stay with me for the next journey into the shadows of the Mafia world.